All right, welcome to Prep Station. We're going to be looking at what it takes to do well in use of English in your JAMB. And we shall be looking at some of the basic things that will assist you in this. And in this regard, we have a scope. And our scope is to look at some of the basic things that your exam covers. For instance, we're going to look at an overview of the syllabus, the JAMB, use of English JAMB syllabus. We're also going to look at the structure of the exams, and we will also look at the content or the topics that are involved and some of the materials that will help you do well in the exams. And in these exams, first of all, you will be tested in some of these areas. For instance, you'll be tested in comprehension, ability to interpret passages, and also you'll be tested in the area of lexis and structure, as well as oral forms. Now, this is important. Some of the questions will require you to read a passage and interpret it, and other questions will test you generally on your understanding of everyday use of language patterns. And then finally, you'll be tested in the area of the spoken aspect of English, where issues like sounds will come about. Now, let's proceed. For this particular session, we have some of the objectives, some of the things that we want to achieve at the end of the day. Number one, we are going to look at a situation whereby by the end of this particular session, you should be able to identify key points in a passage, and that's not just for this particular teaching, but also for the exams you're going to take. The exam will test your understanding of how to identify main points in any passage you will be asked to read. Number two, you will be also tested on the area of how to identify the information that is not clearly stated in the passage. We're talking about the implied meaning of either words, phrases, or sentences. Number three, you also be tested in the area of grammatical functions and expressions. Of course, the grammatical functions of words and certain expressions, your knowledge of it will also be tested in the exams. Another thing that you'll be tested in will be on how to infer the intended meaning of the expressions and the general message of the passage you're going to read, some of the opinions of maybe the writer you'll be tested on. And also you'll be tested in the area of how to determine meaning in a context. This is important because words do not do the same thing in all contexts. There are certain contexts that words behave differently in relation to other ones. So you will be tested in this regard. Another thing that you'll be tested in will be how to verify or how to determine meaning in terms of oppositeness, which is also important, and also sameness in meaning. These are some of the areas you also be tested in. Another thing is how to punctuate correctly and also how to spell correctly. So your correct spellings and punctuation will also be tested. Another thing that you need to have at the back of your mind while going into the exams is to identify, there are some grammatical patterns that you should be aware of that are commonly used. So you should also be able to have them at the back of your mind and also try to understand them when you go into the exams, and you will be tested in those areas equally. And another thing is how to understand communication in specific contexts. So contextuality is key and is an aspect of your use of English exams. So you will also be tested in the area of the spoken English, where you will have to identify consonant sounds and vowels in some of the words they will bring out for you. And you also be tested in the area of stress Of course, word stress and stress at the sentence level. You'll be tested in all of these areas. So after looking at the objectives of the exams and what we are going to do here today, I want us to look at the structure of the exams. How is the exam going to appear on paper for you, on the question paper? That's what we are going to look at next. First of all, you're going to have 3 sections in the exams. You have section 1, or what you can also call section A, section B, and section C. So the exams will be in 3 sections. So section A will be comprehension and summary. And in this case, you're going to have 2 comprehension passages. So in the 2 comprehension passages, you're going to have 10 questions. From them, you're also going to have a closed passage. And there you're going to have 10 questions. The closed passage, it's more or less like a passage will be given to you. Some words will be extracted, some words will be taken out, and then a list of such words will be given to you so that you can pick them and fill them in. And also the text that you are going to use for the exams, which you have been given already, which you have been reading, you're going to have 15 questions there. So apart from section A, in section B, you're going to have some questions on lexis and structure. And in this regard, you will be tested on interpreting sentences. And you're going to have 10 questions from this aspect. And you also be tested in the area of antonyms. We're talking about opposite in meaning. So you will have 10 questions coming from antonyms. And you will also be tested in the area of synonyms. Of course, in synonyms, you're talking about sameness in meaning, words that can replace one another in some context. So you're going to have 10 questions from there. And you will also be tested in the area of sentence completion. Here, some words will be taken out from sentences, and a list of such words will be given together with other words or phrases, and then you will be required to pick the right one that will complete the sentence. So this will be contained in what we can call lexis and structure. And then another section of the exam is section C, which has to do with the spoken. You'll be tested on the spoken English. And in this case, you're going to have 15 questions. When you're talking about the spoken English, the aspects that you'll be tested in will be on vowels and consonants, consonant clusters. You also be tested on stress, that's intonation as well. For instance, the English sound system contains about 44 sounds, and in this regard, you have 20 of them as vowels and 24 as consonants. And out of the 20 vowels, you have 12 monophthongs and 8 diphthongs. But we're going to go into some of these details later on. Now let's move on. We're going to look at the content of the exams now. By content, we are looking at some of the things that are really involved, some of the areas that you need to pay particular attention in order to do well in exams. For instance, in comprehension and summary, you will be given 2 passages, like we said earlier on, and the passages can come from maybe description, they can come from a narrative essay or article, they can come from exposition, they can also come from either argumentative or, if you like, persuasive writing. Argumentative and persuasive writing, the same thing. So when you are talking about description, of course, it's a kind of writing that tries to paint a picture of a particular thing. It could be a picture of a place, it can be a picture of an idea, it can also be a picture of an abstract thing, it can be a picture of a place, it can be a picture of anything. But what the writer tries to do in descriptive writing is to try to describe how something looks like, how a particular situation is. So you're going to have a passage either on that, or you're going to have a passage on a story. A story will be picked from somewhere, and you'll be asked to read it and answer some question on it, or you will also be given a passage on an informative writing, which is expository writing, what we can also call exposition. In this regard, someone will just explain how something works. Maybe a new invention, you can just have a passage on it, and then you'll be required to read a passage and answer some questions, specific questions. And then argumentative, of course, this is a kind of writing that takes side. Someone will come up with an idea, and then he will try to take side in explaining it. Or sometimes it could even be weighing the two sides of an argument in order to strike a balance. So you might be given a passage on this too. So these are some of the areas that you need to really pay attention. If I were you, or I should advise you to start practicing reading a lot of articles across different areas of human endeavor, so that you will be familiar with how some of these things work. And also, under the same comprehension and summary section A, you will also be tested on the area of how to show clear understanding of the passage that you will be given. The passage, remember, I said can be on any of those 4 types of essay writings. So it could be on description, it could be on narrative, it could be on description, it could also be on exposition, and maybe persuasive writing. All these words, you should just expect any passage from, or any passages from those 3 areas. Now, having looked at this, I want us to also understand that in the same section A, you will also be tested in the area of showing understanding of maybe the meaning of words, phrases, clauses, and sentences. Some expressions will be extracted, and you will be required to explain what they mean as used in the passage. In the same section, you also be tested in the area of idiomatic expressions. A particular section, or maybe a particular phrase or an expression will just be picked, and then you will be required to explain what it means by choosing the correct option from the list of options that were presented to you in the question. And at the same time, under comprehension and summary section A, you will also be tested in the area of showing the ability to infer, showing the ability to come up with the information that is not clearly stated in the passage. So you will be asked some questions in this area as well. So you also be given some questions in a text that you will be required to read and write. The text is usually given before the exam day. So it is up to you to read the text very well, and then understand what is there, and then answer some questions on it. So after looking at some of the basic things that are involved in section A, I want us to look at some of the topics that you need to really have an understanding on in order to do well in section A, comprehension and summary. So first of all, like I said, these ones are here. You need to read wide. Now, you read a lot of articles, you read a lot of passages in textbooks, and a whole lot. Anything that you can lay your hands on, you can read. You can read a lot of things in the magazine, in the newspapers, in order to be able to have a general overview of what writers do when they describe. You should also read wide to have a general understanding of what writers do when they narrate, how stories are told, and how to interpret stories. And also, you should read wide. It's about practice. It's about, going out there to make sure that you prepare very well for these exams. So you also read a lot of things on exposition to have an idea of how writers expose a lot of information to readers in their writings. So when you have this understanding, once you encounter a particular passage, it will be easy for you to determine whether that passage is a descriptive writing, or it's a narrative writing, or it's an argumentative writing, or maybe it's just an informative writing, what we can also call an expository essay. So I may not need to talk so much about this because you will not be required to write an essay. So what you need, the basic knowledge you need here is the knowledge to have a clear understanding of when you see a descriptive essay, you should be able to know that this is a descriptive essay, and then by way of interpreting it, you will be able to come up with some of those things that you are required to do, in the process of answering the questions. And also the same thing with narrative, expository, and argumentative essay. Now, another thing that you will be tested in regarding summary and comprehension is figures of speech. Your knowledge of the basic figures of speech will be tested in this regard. Of course, it's not literature, it's just language. So there are some basic, figures of speech that as a student of language, you should be able to know, should be able to interpret. So some of these basic ones include, number one, alliteration. Alliteration has to do with the use of same consonant sound, from the beginning of words that are close to one another. For instance, you have children play pranks at their detriment. Now, you notice the use of P in play, the use of P in pranks. All these things are important. So when you have that kind of usage, notice that it's a figure of speech and you might be tested on this particular one. Number two, you will also need to know what assonance is. Assonance, to some extent, it's not a direct opposite of alliteration, but somehow we can say, maybe for the purpose of our discussion here, regard it as the opposite of alliteration. Because in alliteration, you have the repetition of the same consonant sound at the beginning of words that are close to each other. On the other hand, in assonance, you have the repetition of the same vowel sound, used in words that are close to one another. For instance, you have men sell wedding bells. You have the E in men, the E in sell, the E in wedding, the E in bells. These are examples of assonance. And apart from assonance, you have what is called personification. Personification is a situation where you give human attributes to what is not human. For instance, in the example that we have here, the scenery rushed backwards. Scenery, of course, it's not human. They don't have human properties of rushing. Human beings should have the ability to rush to the office, to rush to the bank, to rush to school and all of that. What is not human shouldn't have that ability. But here the writer says the scenery rushed backwards. So it's an example of personification because it gives human attribute. The idea of rushing is associated with human beings and other animals. So, but here the writer, for the fact that he wants to make what he wants to talk about come real, he decides to give the human attribute to non-human or inanimate. Another one that I want us to look at, which is also common in JAMB, please, I want you to take note of this. Metaphor is so common in JAMB. A lot of times you have them coming up with expressions that are metaphorical. For instance, a metaphor in this example is words are eggs, they can break. It's metaphorical. Of course, you should have an understanding that metaphor refers to a comparison that does not involve the use of as or like. That's a simple definition. But then beyond that, we have metaphor. Metaphor occurs sometimes when you have an expression that has an underlying meaning. You understand? But in this regard, from this example, words are eggs, they can break. It's metaphorical because the writer, compares words with eggs without using as or like. And he simply says words are eggs. And why are they eggs? They can break the same way eggs break. Another one that I want us to look at is synecdoche. It's also a figure of speech. And in synecdoche, you have the part representing whole, or you have the whole representing part. For example, you have the king summoned all heads to his palace. The king summoned all heads to his palace. Now, I want us to take note of this, heads, referring to probably the people he works with. He's talking about human beings here. Heads here, the writer is talking about human beings, probably the leaders. You understand? So he's using human head, which is just part of the human body, to stand in for the entire human being, to make reference to the entire human being. So it's an example of synecdoche. Another figure of speech that I want us to also look at is metonymy. Of course, metonymy is a situation whereby you use part of something or what someone or something is known for. You're not using that particular thing to refer to the person generally, or to the group, or to that particular thing. For instance, if you say he loves anything in skirt, it's an example of metonymy, in the sense that a certain group of human beings are associated with wearing skirt or wearing skirts, and the women are the ones. So if you say he loves anything in skirt or anything in skirt, you are particularly talking about he loves women, because women are associated with wearing skirt. Another figure of speech that is so common is rhetorical question. In rhetorical question, the writer asks some questions, but then he does not really expect the reader to answer the question, or the listener to answer the question. He just asks the question to get the reader or the listener involved in the discussion. When you are reading or when you are listening to someone and a question is posed which you are not required to answer, it draws your attention to get engaged in what you are either reading or listening. So rhetorical questions are used a lot, especially in argumentative writings. Another figure of speech that is of importance to us in this case is simile, which to some extent is the opposite of metaphor. We talked about metaphor, a comparison without using as or like. And then in simile, you have a kind of comparison, the same comparison, but this time around, the writer is not direct. He uses as or is to compare one thing with another. For example, he is as anxious as a caged dog. A caged dog. So take note of it. Another figure of speech that I want us to look at is irony. Now, irony is a situation whereby when someone says something and means another. Now, you have three types of irony, but I may not necessarily bother you with the three. We just focus on the one that is mostly used in a lot of situations, in everyday language use. Otherwise, we have three types of irony. Number one, you have situational irony, you have verbal irony, and dramatic irony. So you have the three: dramatic irony, situational irony, and verbal irony. The one that is mostly used by people is the one that is called the verbal irony, where someone says something and then he means another. The dramatic irony, it happens especially in drama, where, in literature generally, where the reader expects something to happen and then the opposite of it happens at the end of the day. Do you understand? We call that, situational irony. In dramatic irony, the readers or the audience, they get to know what is going to happen, or they get to know what characters are going through, or what a particular character is going through in a work of art before the characters themselves get to know about it. When that happens, you know that there is dramatic irony. Another one is hyperbole. Of course, hyperbole is an exaggeration. Do you understand? Stating more than what something is like. For example, the world must hear this today. Someone exclaimed, the world must hear this today. It's an example of hyperbole, because no matter what, the world cannot hear what, the person is about to say. So we're going to have a break now. We'll come back later.